Good evening. Good evening. My name is Jim Stockard. I'm the curator of the Loeb Fellowship here at the Graduate School of Design, and I want to welcome you to the 7th annual Margaret McCurry Lecture in the Design Arts. This lectureship was established in order to honor Margaret in her long-standing service to the Graduate School of Design and to Harvard University in general. Margaret's from Chicago. She's a principal in the firm of Tigerman McCurry Architects, a much respected and oft awarded firm for their architecture, their interior, and their thinking about architecture. Margaret herself has been awarded many times by the AIA and by the ASID, and was selected for the Interior Design Hall of Fame in 1990. We at the Loeb Fellowship are particularly proud to be hosting tonight's lecture because Margaret was a Loeb Fellow at the Graduate School of Design in 1986-87. Margaret's been very active locally and nationally. She headed the AIA's Committee on Design. She's been a director of the Harvard Alumni Association, and she served as chair of the GSD Alumni Council. The Margaret McCurry Lectureship has been established in order to bring to the podium in Piper Auditorium the widest possible range of practitioners of the design arts. Here at the GSD, we train architects, landscape architects, urban designers, urban planners, but we have enormous respect for the perspective, the vocabulary, and the point of view of artists who express themselves through the design arts in the widest possible range of fields. A few years ago, Philip Glass, the great composer, gave this lecture in this auditorium. And so tonight we're pleased to welcome another practitioner of those arts from yet a different field than the one we practice most intensely here within our halls. To introduce our speaker, I will turn the podium over to Toshiko Mori. Toshiko is known in New York and by her clients as the principal of Toshiko Mori Architects, a firm she started in 1981. Obviously, as you meet her, she started this firm when she was a teenager. People around the world know her as the former chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Design. Who knew the World Economic Forum was interested in design until Toshiko got in the middle of them? And furthermore, we at the GSD know her as the Robert P. Hubbard Professor of the Practice of Architecture, the chair of our Department of Architecture from 2002 to 2008, and a highly respected member of our faculty. Toshiko?
Thank you, Jim. And it turns out to be this is the last of a lecture series of this semester at the GSD. And not the least, I'm very happy to be able to introduce Antony Gormley tonight. It's a moment of calm before the storm of getting ready for final review starts. So I am very happy to be here to really listen and see his work tonight. I admire Antony and his work. In particular, I admire the clarity and directness with which he engages us. He proclaims modernism failed because it was inadequately common and inadequately linked to experience. His work captures our attention, and we are transformed into keen observers, actively challenged by what we see. He also says he brings back the body, which was rejected by modernism. Instead of abstraction, his work is truly embodiment. I had the pleasure of having his pieces situated in two of my projects. They are both for Sean Kelly, his gallerist and our friend, one a permanent installation in Sean's house, and another titled Body Space, the inaugural exhibition of his new gallery on 36th Street and 10th Avenue in New York City, which opened last fall. For this exhibition, Antony precisely located his sculpture, Showa 2, a cube with a crouching figure, as mass and weight in dialogue with the gallery's vast space. The piece weighs 10 tons and measured 31 inches by 31 inches by 70 inches. As architects, we had to know the precise route of its journey to the location, maintaining awareness of structural alignment and trajectory, an X-ray skeleton in the building. Location is an important concept in his work, for all of his sculptures make and claim a place in that they transcend objects because they necessitate a relationship which creates a charged atmosphere in the territory surrounding them. He talks about adequate absence of space in the work for projection of the viewer. In other words, through experience of walking around the work, the viewer participates in the dialogue with art itself. He says, quote, "Art becomes an open space where we can ask fundamental questions about ourselves," end of quote. For Sean and Mary Kelly's house in upstate New York, he placed a sculpture titled You, a human figure at the extension of the diagonal of the first floor plan of the house, just outside of a cantilever. The location for this piece is critical because there was a rock on that spot where one felt a powerful spiritual alignment. According to the local legend, the site was said to be the ancient seasonal gathering place for Native Americans. The sculpture is a symbolic and scalar element contrasting architecture and human body. Yet the body is outside of a house, exposed in the midst of nature, unsheltered from weather. It creates tension between nature, the body, and the house, which mutates through the time of the day and the season, yet it shares the horizontal datum of the house. He claims that his sculptures are about being instead of doing. It is an interval between meditation and interrogation. Spiritual quality and atmospheric resonance are interrupted by sharp and inquisitive questions of philosophical nature that arise in our mind as we contemplate and experience his work. It is simultaneously calming and stimulating, challenging our senses. He calls this effect like opening a window in a closed room. Gormley's work is widely exhibited internationally, with exhibitions in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia in 2012, the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg in 2011, and Kunsthaus Bregenz in 2010, among others. He has participated in group shows including the Venice Biennale and Documenta, Art Limited at Art Basel this year, and Uncommon Ground, Land Art in Britain, 1966 to 1979, at Southampton City Art Gallery again this year. His solo exhibitions include 4 exhibitions this year in Antwerp in Brussels, Hayama, Japan, and Salzburg, Austria. He has a great number of work in public spaces, some of which are Cloud Chain in French National Archives, a permanent installation last year, Horizontal Field in Vorarlberg, Austria, and even Event Horizon surrounding Madison Square in New York City in 2010. He's a recipient of a Turner Prize and the Bernard Hellinger Award for Sculpture, among many other honors. Most recently, he won the Premium Imperiale Prize in Sculpture this fall, a Japanese equivalent of Nobel Prize. Please welcome Antony Gormley.
Can you hear me clearly? After Toshiko's extraordinarily well-considered introduction, I wonder if I really need to give this lecture at all. I have to thank you, Toshiko. They were very well thought and constructed words. Things like this are always quite strange for a maker. I have to thank Helen Marriage and Moisen and all of you for being here. I make things, and increasingly things become situations. And in a way, the very fact that I'm standing here talking is a betrayal of my primary calling, which is to make silent things that can communicate in ways that words can't. So I find myself in a strange position. I want to just open this evening up a bit. I need you. I need your energy. I need your attention. This isn't scripted. I'm going to show you some projects, but the bit that I'm looking forward to is when we can talk together about, in a way, the field that those objects might activate. It's a strange world, isn't it, when last week a triptych by Francis Bacon sold for some extraordinary price. But at the same time, somebody's having a good time in the room next door. Do you think we ought to join them? At the same time, there is a sense, a growing sense, that people want to participate in the spaces that art offers. And we all know about the success. I think you have a great success here in the new MoMA, and the proliferation of spaces, both formal and informal. And I think this is a symptom of something much bigger. Forgive me if there's just going to be a little bit of a kind of historic contextualization now. So, as I see it, the history of modernism, really the previous 100 years, from really Picasso's first works to more or less the end of minimalism, you could say, was the process of art calling back to itself its right of self-determination. That no longer was art going to serve power, or power of the patron, or innovate, or somehow read the power of the patron, whether church, and was going to search its own syntax, was going to look into, as it were, the fact of perception and how that might be translated into objects that themselves could open the doors of perception. Now, it's very, very strange to me that the rise of late capitalism and the of art happened at the same time, and you get a strange kind where objects that should, in Mondrian's view, the whole reason for abstract, make art that really could be everybody's. Curiously, that wonderful pioneering spirit of returning art to the commons, which in some curious way, in my view, it should never have left and never did left. Nobody asked for art to be privatized. Art is a gift. It is there to be shared. But anyway, what happened was, curiously, the story of modernity, the story of modernism, became... Sorry, is this not working? That's annoying. So you've got one word in three. That's really important. I mean, that's really depressing, because I was really thinking. I was thinking hard there, and you will have got, you will have got the equivalent of the Daily Telegraph crossword puzzle. Okay. So this was my kind of political pitch here, that basically, yeah, late capitalism managed to kind of somehow commodify the story of something that was supposed to be actually about liberation, about returning art to, in a way, primary experience, liberating art from the power of money, state, and church. And I think the object nature translated into exchange value completely overtook use value. So my return to the body was an attempt to, in some way, in the manner of Descartes' kind of discourse on method, to say, you know, what if I want to return the content and subject and indeed material of art to fundamentals in the same way that Mondrian went to red, blue, and yellow and vertical and horizontal lines. I'd like to return art to existence rather than, in a way, formal language, syntax. Can we start with the body? But can we think about the body in a different way? And I guess my first attempt at dealing with the body was to think about what it needs: food and shelter, clothes and bread. But that led me to thinking about it less as an object and more of a place. And I think this is where, in a way, those of you that are architects and those of you that are visual artists will, I think, see the connection. I think there are really, for me, only two subjects, and that is body and space, and that translates really into being and place, physical experience and architecture, the shelters that we, in a way, protect, but also extend our bodily experience. So, has that slide been up there all the time? That was very sneaky, because I was hoping that was going to be a surprise. But never mind, I've lost my now theatrical moment. Anyway, so here, this is my body about 12 years ago. So here is an indexical register of a lived moment. So it's forensic, just like what the FBI do when they're trying to investigate a serious crime. You have to have, in a way, trace. But this is more than a trace, this is actually proof. But it's a body that is in relation with its habitat. And in a sense, it is testing it. But equally, the habitat is testing the body. It's a body that, I think, betrays its origins. You can see the sign of the cling film, not very well on this slide, perhaps, but you can see the trace of the cling film, the way that the story of its manufacture. These lines are simply the loose piece lines between the bits of the mold out of which it was cast. It has these buttons. This is where the can you all hear? I'm now really worried that I've lost contact with my audience. It's probably not a bad thing. You can hear, good. They're here and two more that maybe you can't see very well. The point here is to say, to make it very, very clear that this is an industrially produced work. It weighs 630 kilos, so over 100 pounds. This is exactly 10 times the specific gravity of the body that gave rise to it. It is subject to gravity, but is also trying to escape from it. So the issue is then, having acknowledged its industrial production, to then demystify the singular nature of the unique object, the kind of icon, the work of genius, turn it into something common by multiplying it, but then also allowing that sense of the way that it tests its environment to be multiplied. So that here is actually a work that is the same moment remade 8 times. This is, after all, the time of mechanical reproduction, that refuses to take the privileged place at the center of the room, separated from the common ground by the sculptural equivalent of the frame, the plinth. And through doing, puts the viewer in the position that formerly would have been occupied by a sexualized, idealized, heroized body. So this is more than simply a re-examination of what a caryatid might be, which is essentially the humanization of the support structures of a building, but rather the reverse. A replicated body that comes out of a moment of a body testing its habitat, disposed into those elements of the architecture that are most useless and where most people get put when they're naughty, and allows the viewer to occupy the place of privilege in the middle. But what happens in this situation? What I'm hoping is that actually all of the certainties that before sculpture underpinned, the idea of continuity, the idea of, in a way, the solidity of the institution, the permanence of architecture, is loosened. So really the point about this is that I want to put that whole room into centrifuge. And you become the sun in a kind of orbital thing. And I'm hoping that very, very far away from the ancient, in a way, the 200-year story of putting the body to work to tell a story, there is a complete inversion. And that, in the end, these are not representations. They're simply reflexive instruments by which you and your experience in space and time is catalyzed. And forgive me if this is sort of wishful thinking, but through this work, I would like you to somehow intuit the fact that we, are spinning around our own axis at about 1,070 kilometers an hour, and around the sun at about 107,000 kilometers an hour. And that's actually quite small beer in terms of the speed that actually the whole of our solar system, which has made about 20 revolutions in the last 5 billion years within this galaxy, which is traveling at about 825,000 kilometers an hour. But actually that's pretty small beer in relation to, well, the scale of space itself, which, as you know, every 3.25 million light years is expanding outwards at about 225 million kilometers an hour. Anyway, the issue that I'm trying to get at here is the work is no longer put into a narrative. I mean, maybe I've just spun you a narrative, literally. But the work is no longer put to work to tell you a story. The story starts the minute you get into the field that the work activates. And I'm hoping, in very much the same manner that a Richard Serra works on you, this work causes you to reassess your position in time and space, and does it not intellectually, but palpably, physically. And I think, for me, this is part of a much bigger theme, which is that art has to and is giving back to the viewer the freedoms that it called for itself in that 100 years of the development of modernity, of modernism. And that call for participation that we see so widely, I think, in the world today, people using the spaces of art to reconsider life itself, that the spaces of art have, in a way, liberated themselves from object nature per se. All of that stuff that Judd was so keen to believe in, but is actually a myth. The specific object, the non-relational object. His work is absolutely architecture, relieved of function, which becomes a formal exercise, which is the end of formality, because it's useless. Art, for me, has to return to its primal duty, which is to give us instruments to live and to think about our lives. And as such, act as some form of catalyst in what we don't know. I mean, there's no question that the greatest kind of creative act that each of us is involved in is making a life that somehow has meaning. And I think that's what art can help with. Anyway, sorry, this is all a bit of a preamble. I want to just show you one or two projects that in some way try to respond to that call. How can you make work that somehow catalyzes first-hand immediate experience of being, not illustrating doing, as Mariko so clearly said. And either you work, as it were, I mean, my work has two very clear trajectories, and I'm going to talk more about one than the other. The first is the one that I've just shown you, which is to sort of try to make an objective correlative of being alive, mapping the moment. The other is to try to make instruments, situations, events that allow the viewer a moment of proprioception, auto-observation, or, even better, allowing the viewer to become the viewed for other viewers, a collective, in a way, field of visuality. And this is an example. This is called Clearing. That title is very important. My titles, I often have more agony finding out what something is called than I do making it. And titles are very, very important to me. Clearing, anyway. So this is a great big scribble that is basically kind of, on one level, trying to cancel out the white cube, the equivalent of the plinth, the privileging space that is in a way the container that has been passed on to us from modernism. And that scribble is, I mean, I brought Cy Twombly to this work I said, but Si, you know, he just stood like here, and he wouldn't go in. I said, look, no, but Si, the whole point is this isn't one of yours. You can get inside it. He said, oh, Annie, you've made such a nice script. I mean, what did he call it? It was something, nest, he said, nest. Such a nice nest, and I just want to stand here and enjoy it, he said. But the whole point was that you should cross the threshold and become the figure in the ground. And that's the whole point. The first one was the first one in White Cube. This was in Kunsthaus Bregenz. An even more spectacular, in a way, box for art. But, so what happens when you go in? Well, that transformation of the viewer becoming the viewed, the dumb, awestruck art lover vanquished by beauty, actually has to become something very, very different. You have to be, you know, like hacking your way through the rainforest. And when you trip up, everybody knows about it because that signal just goes like right through the whole thing. This is about 5.5 kilometers of continuous aluminium tube without beginning or end. Wendy, can we? Yeah, let's try that. This is just to give you an idea. If you can give me a bit of sound on this too, just to give you the acoustic. This is actually underneath the Palazzo Strozzi in Florence. But that thing of allowing people to rediscover, in a way that, you know, you could say, well, this is a choreographic score, but it's about just allowing people, in some sense, to behave in ways in which they have to be involved. There is none of that distance between, in a way. Yes, that was the sound. Actually, Wendy, that'll do. That'll do. We'll go on. But that idea that somehow present time narrative replaced by the thing that happens as you are making your way through this space, replacing any idea of, in a way, a given narrative. So, I'm sorry that Helen isn't here, but these thoughts led. You can probably tell that my work isn't formally consistent. I think that the investigation is consistent. The forms that I find I end up with are a result of the investigation, not about stylistic imposition. So anyway, here we are on the plinth. Sorry, I'm just going to go back. So you know where we are. This is Trafalgar Square. Has Helen talked to you about this extraordinary project? I mean, basically, this plinth made of granite from Scotland was put up in the mid-19th century for William IV, the son of George IV, the original Silly Billy. Nobody liked him very much. He had 11 illegitimate children by the time he got onto the throne. I don't know whether that had anything to do with it, but nobody would pay for the 5 times life-size equestrian statue that was supposed to go up there. So contemporary art has been begrudgingly given this cast-off old bit of Victorian street furniture as the best it can aspire to within the confines of central London. I think it's a disgrace, really. I told them originally, if they gave me the whole square and allowed me to move the column to the side, that would be a better But in the end, I had this idea, and I, yeah, we managed with Helen's help to do it. And in a sense, this was the continuation of my thoughts, using, as it were, that instrument of the separation idealization, and in a way moral implication of the plinth, that somebody who occupies a plinth in some way is to be admired. There is some message about superiority. Somebody high on a plinth has higher values, and in some way, both figuratively and literally, is above us that exist in common ground. But for me, the idea of elevating common ground to that in a way, idealized position. This is 21 feet above the ground. We're looking at it from the north side. And basically, I just asked if people would like to occupy it an hour each, 24 hours a day and night, for 100 days. We distributed the hours demographically, so London had 72, I think Scotland got 37, something like that. There was no predetermined curation. Basically, it was an entirely lottery-run operation. Anybody who applied went into a hat, and if they were lucky, they got picked. We didn't know what they were going to do until they told us, and it was our duty to make that 1 hour fully supported and the best it could be for the person. The thing that I was interested in is how this simple translation, and the pieces that I loved the most were actually the bits of everyday life, like this woman who simply carried on, as it were, her domestic life, but on a surface 14 foot by 5.5. What was really important was, for me, was to see how the life of the square changed as a result of this exchange, and how you could see people's minds were being changed about, in a way, what was possible, but also, in a sense, how they should interpret this translation. The level of creativity of the people who applied was extraordinary, from this lady who was, in a way, making a late spare rib sort of, throw away your bra protest come celebration. And the way in which those 1 hour moments of, you could say, time taken out of life, because for the people, that's what it was. It was a moment where they could perhaps use that time to think about their lives when they weren't, as it were, isolated from the street by 21 feet of granite. Or more commonly, they thought, I'm going to use it for a protest or a particular cause or a particular memory. This whole thing is available should you want. All 2,400 hours are archived by the British Library, and if you go to the British Library site and you type in one another, you can relive the whole thing. Not that you'd want to do that necessarily, because that's a long time. But this, in a way, testing of values, of representations, in the end, for me, was the most exciting thing. What we were doing was making the portrait of a time with real
lives. And the collective thing was actually a collective portrait of Britain in the beginning of the new millennium. And that idea of participation, about the viewers becoming the viewed, about, in a way, through that process of self-reflection, I don't know, getting a bit looser. And I guess for me that the interface between private and public, between, in a way, the place of art as a place of individual personal inscription, but also sharing and revelation, is, well, I think part of this process of opening. This for me was one of the most moving performances. This girl applied through, I think, peer and friend pressure, was deeply, deeply agoraphobic. She got up there and could not move, and spent her entire hour in this tight ball, mostly with her head buried between her knees. And in complete distinction to those that had managed to use their hour to dance tango movements with a Mexican band around the bottom of the plinth, or get married. This moment of exposed personal intimacy was extraordinarily moving, and in a sense heroic, in a very, very different way, obviously, to the sculptures of Nelson, Napier, and the military heroes that otherwise occupied the square. So that idea of collective space, the idea of somehow an open space in which the intimate becomes public, and maybe the public becomes intimate, is of interest to me. This is called Breathing Room. There have been many versions of it. It's essentially about 40% of the cubic volume of a given space, redescribed in space frames. They are all identical. In this case, this is about 120 cubic meters, with every frame stretched in a different axis, but they nest. And this is White Cube in London, and this exists as an underground space. So you're aware that you're under the level of the pavement. 10 minutes of darkness followed by 40 seconds of blinding light. This is 70,000 lux. Each of these, each of those is 1,000 watt quartz halogen light. Can we have this little film, Wendy? And time becomes a very important structure. Sound in this is important, as you'll see. Maybe we should have these lights off a bit more, because it's very dark, this film. Oh, great, thanks. So what's interesting here is the immersive quality. People are walking through the luminous skeleton
forest of luminous lines.
Oh, there we go.
It seems to stem from a map on the floor, which makes you actually have to be very careful about where you put your feet.
this is where the light goes. This is where the light's going on, and it's very dramatic. That feeling of. So that that gives you some indication of both the acoustic but also the immersive nature of this, in a way, abstracted and dematerialized architecture. But what I was interested in is how that interface between the meditative and the interrogative worked, and how it led people to be together in a way that they wouldn't have been otherwise. I'm just going to show you two more projects now. So this people were always asking me after one another, after the Plinth project, and I really couldn't imagine what it was going to be. But this is what happened in the end. This is another way of trying to make I think a collective space of the viewer becoming the viewed. So this is a platform 50 meters long by 25 meters wide, suspended from the trusses of a 1900. Anyway, it was built originally as a market hall. It's built very much like those Zeppelin buildings. Lightweight structure of its time. I'd originally been offered a retrospective. I wasn't really interested in a retrospective. The floor anyway couldn't take any weight, and this was the result of a long iteration, really, looking at different possibilities. And what was in my mind was how can we again make a space in which people are reconnected with their own direct experience, but in the most open way. So there's no containing fence, but we have a stainless steel net, and the whole thing has an oscillation of about 0.8 hertz. So it takes about 6 seconds to move about 6 feet. And I think of this as a kind of working model of democracy. The individual can affect the group, and the group the individual. If you really want to get that thing swinging as a single person, and there are another, I didn't explain, 100 people at a time can go onto this structure. You go up these stairs on the right, you then go over this bridge, and then step out onto the surface. The surface is completely mirror-like. There's 6.5 tons of polyurethane black paint that's been painted on top. And when you come into the building, I asked everyone to remove their shoes and socks. So there was this sense of, in a way, receiving impressions from the soles of your feet. The surface was only 1/2 inch thick, so about an eighth of that was the polyurethane, the rest was plywood, and it was like a membrane. And through it, you could feel every other footfall on that surface. Can we, have the film? Oh dear. I just want to show you what it's like when it's moving. This was a film of it being made, but I thought that was rather... So here, can you see now? This is the effect. And what was extraordinary was this sense of, on this surface, sorry, it was a very just small clip, but it's actually the only way of explaining to you this sense of I talked about the destabilization in Withdrawn, the 8 pieces in the corners, but this was absolute, palpable, physical destabilization within the stability of architecture. And what was wonderful for me was the way in which the widest possible range of human behavior was, in a way, not only kind of supported, but encouraged. So this shows it all, in a way, like young children running up and down because it bounces. A couple looking out through the windows. We removed all of the obscure glass all the way around the building at eye level, so that you could, this was an inversion of the museum, so that you could look out at the world that you'd left as a representation, and like these two are doing, pointing out to each other the parts that they know, or points of interest. Exactly as you might in a museum looking at a large maquette or a history painting, point out bits of detail. So that idea of, in a way, literally inverting the museum and allowing this huge, great abstract painting turned on its back to be occupied by real life, for that life to be proprioceptive, but also looking back at the world that it had left as a representation. So using this vantage point, in a way, as a place of reflection, literally, but also reorientation. The same thoughts went into this work. So this is Breathing Room, a 40 by 40 by 10 foot high box filled with 7,000 lux of light and a dense cloud, the threshold of which is permanently open, into which you are invited to walk, and the minute that you cross that threshold, you disappear, not just to others, but to yourself. You can't see your feet, you can't see your hand in front of you, and you become a disembodied, perceiving consciousness. But for those outside the box, you occasionally appear as you try to orientate yourself and come to that outer skin. I never imagined this, this would be the subject of mass appeal. But people would queue for hours in order to go across that threshold. And I've got a very short film. Can we just show this film that conveys something of the acoustic atmosphere inside? Can you turn the sound up a bit?
I think you're officially gone. Let's see. Sorry.
What happens in this situation is that people, when they appear to you well within your, as it were, intimate body zone. So they go from being this lost in this acoustic environment in which you hear the giggles, and people were always asking, "What did you put in that? What did you put in that?" There must have been amyl nitrate in that cloud there. Everybody was kind of giggling, but there was nothing in the cloud. It was just pure water, but of a very high density.
Very frightening.
This is a guy who's just saying,
backward, not knowing where you're going, where the walls are. Nah, not knowing where you're going. It's a bit, you lose yourself on purpose, innit?
Anyway, losing yourself on purpose in order to maybe discover something else about that interface between self and other, or knowing and not knowing. I'm just going to end now with almost the reverse of that project, and certainly the most architectural thing that I have ever made, and the reconciliation, you could say, of the two trajectories of my work, trying to make the objective correlative of what it feels like to inhabit a body by making the body again, and making these situations in which people feel their own present experience through their context. So this is the you go down a corridor and you are confronted by a steel wall. You then come into a room. The room is about 110 feet long, 80 foot wide, and 18 foot tall. These are milled sheets of steel made into boxes. You can explore this internalized architecture, and there are passages that allow you to do that. But in fact, this whole thing is a mapping of the body. This is the form. We've just looked down this side of the body. You can see basically it's a recumbent body translated into 24 chambers, 3 of them without lids that allow access of light. So that first experience of exclusion and the need to explore, in a way, the interface between the internal walls of the room and the external rooms of this structure then gives way to the possibility of being able to enter it. And you pass in through the end of the right foot into this interior that is dark, has totally different volumes and scales, and in the same manner as clearing invites you to use your body in a way as a total sensing device. Sometimes you can't tell whether something is a wall or an aperture, and you move through spaces that are sometimes completely black, and you have to use your oral facilities like a bat, working out how big the volumes are that you're moving through. And then you'll see at the end of a passage an indirect shaft of light. Wendy, could we play the acoustic? But at the same time, the acoustic environment of this work is critical because it tells you, like the giggling in Blind Light, that this is an occupied body, and somewhere within its chambers are other members of the collective body. And the extraordinary thing, we had to survey the floor, and it wasn't flat, so the whole thing was, oh dear, the whole thing was actually floating on the floor and was live. And occasionally you would find an arm coming out from underneath where you were standing, or you would come across another body suddenly illuminated in a shaft of light, or find that you were actually blocking the passage of someone who was trying to get through a narrow defile. What was strange was that the feeling of being interned or inside a cave system or being in a tomb, in spite of what you knew, you had walked all around this object and you'd maybe even seen the model of it in the model room, and yet the capability of being quite scared and quite lost was still there. It ended in this is the penultimate space, in a chamber where sometimes you would find, as with this, people resting, and then round a corner you were able to go in that corner there is actually an aperture, and you end up in the head, and the head was the darkest place in the whole structure, but in it you could hear everything else that was happening. You were somehow conscious of the entire body. Wendy, you can turn the sound off now. Anyway, that's as far as I've got on my journey, and thank you for bearing with me tonight while I tried to describe, in a way, the passage from one of these spaces to another. My hope is that in some way, as with the Burkean Sublime, the platform that separates you from, in a way, the comfort of the common ground, but also brings you together in a new way. Those that overcome their fear of claustrophobia and enter this, in a way, known structure with unknown consequences, somehow discover something about themselves, but also each other that they wouldn't without it. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I think we would like to see if we can ask you questions.
Yeah, no, you can. You're very welcome to ask questions.
Yes?
Did you talk to any of the people who went through, let's say, the white space, the fog, like, I don't know what you called it, the white room with the water? Yeah, it's called blind light. I'm sorry, blind light. And have you talked with, did you talk with any of the folks who went through it and to try to determine what their reactions were? I guess what I'm thinking about is what is the impact of a work like that after they leave, the next day, the next week, etc.?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
It's a very good question. Have I registered in a way the effect of the work, and is my subject really psychology, and am I really actually just a kind of doing, I think, like behaviorist experiments on human beings? And actually, I think it's very, I obviously have talked and met lots of people that have been through that, and they've told me their stories, and sometimes they're often extraordinary ones of often life, death, you know, oh, Mr. Gormley, now I know what it's like to be dead, kind of revelations. But actually, I think for me, I can't interfere or take interest in what the effects are of my work. I can only take responsibility for making the structure as well as I possibly can and test it on myself.
So it's interesting that, and I think, I mean, this is a really interesting question about what one's responsibility is, and it's still, my responsibility is still actually the responsibility of a sculptor who makes a defined object that has its own properties, that he releases into the world for better or for worse, and allows it to do what it does. But you know, I wouldn't. I'm not going to make another version of that. I've made it, and I wouldn't want. You know, the idea that one would test drive it, have a kind of you know, sample group of people that then gave you their reactions, and that you would tune it. That would never be what I would want to do. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Have this.
I apologize. Because given the way you've described what underlies your work, the inversion, there was so much going on in that. And on the one hand, when you see some of the reactions, you think this is like a carnival ride. And there's a lot more, I think, that was built into it. And I guess from my own perspective, wanted to make sure that this was more than a carnival ride. And maybe that's all it is meant to be. And we, as you said, we really shouldn't interfere. But I just am really curious whether there were any change of perceptions that, as I said, underlie your work that then get transferred onto the people who actually experienced it.
This is really an important point. And you could say that it's a point of tension in contemporary art generally. The move towards, as it were, this participatory kind of arena, and the degree to which that can become pure entertainment. I mean, the opposite of reflexivity. But the strange thing is that I don't want to be responsible then for founding a new church in which people are told how to behave. And you have to. I mean, I would say with the last piece, Model, there was a, you know, through its life, it was on show for about 3 months. You knew very well that if you went in the afternoon at about 4 o'clock, it would be filled with school children, and the thing was just like a schoolyard. If you went at 10 in the morning, it was actually it was like going to the Artichoke Chapel. And I think that's part of the work's success, in a sense, that actually it's a resonator. It's not, it hasn't got a determined, we don't, you know, there are no correct ways of approaching it. And I wouldn't want to determine that. I mean, you know, for me, the piece is a, you know, it's an existential litmus test, and therefore it's quite a serious piece of work. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to stop. You know, I think that with the platform, it was the children that taught the adults how to extend their in a way their behavior in order to actually engage with the work. So it may well be, I mean, you know, I guess, you know, thinking wishfully perhaps, that even if it was, you know, at the time, fun and games, that maybe the experience of being in those spaces in those times can be thought about later differently. Sorry, that was a long. Anybody else?
Yes, another question.
Yeah, is this on? Yeah. Your work seems to be conceived always as interactive for the viewer, and you actually talk about the viewer when explaining it. Who is a viewer for you? Who's that? What is that subject? like when you're thinking of your work and when you're conceiving your work?
I can't. The subject is me. I can't think of. I mean, this connects very much with the previous question. I can't think, you know, of the viewer. I can only make the situation and then see the viewer. And of course, it's never one, it's always multiple. And I mean, I think we're getting at something here, which is to do with the instrumental. If I was concerned with the viewer, I would be wanting to act on the viewer in a particular way, and I don't. I would like to share a phenomenon, a structure that I find of interest with somebody, and then discover, you know, with them, or perhaps for myself, and then share it with them. And I think that's the difference, perhaps, between these kinds of projects and, say, the functional responsibilities of architecture. Because I'm not seeking a predetermined success rate or otherwise for the effectiveness of the piece. And it's a strange thing. I mean, you know, how one work evolves into another. Because yeah, you know, I'm not going to make another blind light, and I won't make another Horizon Field Hamburg, the moving platform. But somehow the experience of having made those moves on into another structure somehow. I mean, it's like, I think I wouldn't have made Horizon Field the swinging football pitch if I hadn't made one another, the Plinth project.
Anthony?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, thank you. Thank you very much. I was really moved by your talk and by your work. And I was really curious, actually, since, you know, your work in a way, I feel you're quite an outlier in the contemporary art world in the sense that it's not about the object. Can you hear me? It's not about the object. And it's also that there's a formal difference between the projects. So I was wanting to ask you who was most influential in your development as an artist, you know, whether, you know, was it a teacher or was it another artist or psychologist? Who for you helped you shape your way because you are such an outlier? Thank you.
Good question. I suppose for me, being in the lightning field and seeing the Earth Room in the late 70s was a revelatory experience. Seeing the work of that whole generation, I owe an enormous amount to American sculpture of the 60s. Carl Andre, Robert Smithson, Judd, and then Sarah, Solowit. The reinforcement of system, process, and material, with a view to acting directly on the world and therefore on the body. Then I think you're asking about artistic influence. I think seeing the work of Merce Cunningham and well, I suppose a lot of the actions and happenings of the 60s. You could say that my return to the body came through the idea of a singular performance or action. Joseph Beuys was very important to me as a student, and I was lucky enough to meet him a couple of times. He was when I was a student, and I think his understanding of the open field of art as a field of inquiry was hugely important to me, and his understanding of the social responsibility of art that was in many ways in distinction to the more, you could say, empirical and materialist concerns of American sculpture of the 60s.
And somebody else has a mic. Yes.
I find your idea very interesting of turning the viewer into the viewed after modernism, and I was very intrigued by the terms that you used to describe the participations on the fourth plinth, because you talked about bits of everyday life, and you talked about exposed personal and intimacy, but you also you talked about bits of everyday life and also exposed personal intimacy. But then you also described them as representations or performances, and those to me conferred them a sense of artificiality. So I was wondering if you could expand a bit more on that, like how real or how artificial those participations were.
Well, good question. I think the truth is that on the plinth you had both, but actually you always had the real because of slippage. And the slippage was often the most poignant thing. When the person with all their props was on their way to the plinth on the telehandler, or when they ran out of things to say, where the in a way persona that they had created, that they wanted to in a way monumentalize, failed. And actually the way in which for many people this was their moment of fame and moment of, this is, I'm going to be broadcast to the world. I've got, there'll be 2 million people seeing me. And my friends will all be on the square. That there was an extraordinary sort of testing moment for them personally. But then you have to think of the opposite, that actually they were like in medieval times when you were put in the stocks. Because the social contract of that was totally relentless. You couldn't say terribly sorry, I'm bored, I want to come down. Or I actually feel really, really scared, I want to come down. The level of commitment was serious. Every plinther was interviewed for between 20 minutes and half an hour before going up. There were psychologists and assistants who had been trained in personal management, and every plinther was then also interviewed after coming down. Anyway, the truth is that this thing of persona projection and personal truth was very much at the heart of this piece. And I mean, in terms of my work, I think that I'm very, very interested in the distinction between, you could say, the mask of personality or what we project to the world, and the truth of our existences, which is, you know, as I stand here in front of you, I'm very aware that my appearance belongs to you, as do your faces belong to me. We all live behind our appearances in this collective condition of the darkness of the body, which for me is a space of imagination, of potential, or whatever. And I'm now making the whole thing that looked like a, you know, reality TV kind of sort of who can do the best kind of party trick on the plinth. Something very different. A public testing of the distinction between what we might imagine we can or could or would like to be and what we really are.
Thank you. And I think we do a last question. I think somebody else has a mic. Yes, yeah, please.
Hi, Anthony. It was a great lecture. What you seem to present, have presented, were a series of ephemeral, short-lived works of art, while there has been this constant association with you, with your more permanent works, The Angel of the North, Crosby Beach. Has there been a constant, well-established distancing from those works on your part?
No, that's the great thing about giving a lecture. You can, I can do exactly what I've just been talking about: reinvent myself and present. No, I thought that in this context, I wanted to just share with you what I'm most excited about in terms of, you could say, the way in which the object nature of art has become more porous and more contingent on event, and that, however, doesn't stop me being completely committed to the making of more. I mean, there is nothing permanent in this world, but more permanent pieces. And The Angel of the North, you know, is, I think, rightly seen as a very, very strange thing, because certainly within British culture there hasn't been a tradition of making, you know, 65-foot high figurative images. That's more associated with, you know, the Yellow River or Luoyang or Dazu or, you know, the Buddhas of Bamiyan. But I think of that as another kind of psychological test. It was, you know, the making of that work was, here is a place, a mound by the A1, the principal connecting roadway between the south and the north, between Scotland and England. The site is very charged. It's where for 300 years people worked in the dark, mining coal. Here we are at a time, this was made in 1998, 27% unemployment. Can we make it's literally like a comforter. Can we make a teddy bear that will be a transitional object for this community in between, I mean, at this painful transition between the industrial and the information age? And that's what I made, and it is unashamedly totemic. It's unashamedly atavistic. But what was absolutely extraordinary is how it worked. We couldn't have predicted that actually this would become, in a way, the objective correlative of a community that felt here is, in a way, an object that can carry our pride in our past, our ability to make things. This was exactly the same time that they were closing all the shipyards, and broadcast that into the future. And anyway, I feel very, very, very proud to have been involved in that. It was actually also collective, insofar as I couldn't have made it without all of those shipbuilding skills that were of the region. I couldn't have made it without all the people that helped. I think, put in the context of what I've been talking about tonight, that idea of art as a collective need, whether it is materialized in an object or experienced as an event, is really the thing that I'm most excited about, and somehow trying to extract it from this curious place that it's become, where it's either isolated within the hospital conditions of a museum collection, where it doesn't have a life with the elements or with a community, and from, in a sense, our both aesthetic and kind of materialist use of art as a kind of, these objects of high worth that are purveyors of unique aesthetic experience, which turns us into kind of dumb consumers rather than active participants.
Well, thank you very much, Antony.